what are the biggest myths that people still believe when it comes to dieting and nutrition?
Well, I think one of the biggest myths easily is, or number one in this case, would be eating is cheating.
And by that, you mean eating while on the bike?
Yeah, so like if you're on the bike, that if you're fueling on the bike, that you are cheating the gains that you're possibly going to get out of that ride, and you could be getting more out of it by doing that.
I feel like it's a mentality that crosses over from other sports that might not go on as long, and you can probably get away with. Although, I mean, potentially you would argue you still need to fuel those properly. But for example, if you're doing a 5K, you're not eating in between that. Or if you're playing a game of football, you might be having a quick swig of drink, but you're not regularly consuming food throughout that activity.
No, exactly. Like I think anything under 90 minutes, you don't really need to fuel for. It's more about what you're having in the lead up to that activity. Whereas if something's starting to go 2 hours or greater, or definitely over 3 or especially 4 hours, then you really need to be fueling on that ride to maximize what you're trying to do.
I was going to say, what's your opinion on fasted training?
I think it's overhyped, and I think that realistically, you're not going to get what you want out of it. And the majority of people that are riding their bikes are just riding their bikes to enjoy riding their bike, or to have some form of training that they enjoy, to ride with friends, or to have an activity or event that they're working towards. But you're going to get always more out of that riding if you fuel for it, and you can ride well, perform well, do the efforts that you need to do, etc.
Quite simply just enjoy it more.
Yeah, exactly.
Rather than end up in a hole and finish the ride and be like, oh, I feel like rubbish.
We've all done it though. You've gone out on a ride, it could be 2 hours, and you've decided to do it fasted, and you feel absolutely shocking at the end of it. And then you come back and you hit the fridge or whatever, and you kind of end up over consuming calories afterwards. You don't really perform the ride how you wanted to because you're struggling towards the end. You're not going to get the most bang for your buck.
You were on a TV show where there was a study comparing fasted versus sugar as fuel.
Yes, I was. Yeah,
for exercise.
Yeah, historic moment. It was a New Year's Day special as well.
Oh, was it?
It was indeed. Yes.
And I would assume that using sugar for fuel is going to have better performance results than doing it fasted. Was
Correct.
that the result of the study?
It was. It was an incredible study. It was. Yeah. But that's what we did. We just used table sugar compared to nothing, and you perform better with table sugar.
There we go. Definitely a myth then.
Easy DIY drink for at home.
I feel like when we talked about this yesterday, you mentioned that you had some experience of fasted training with pros and monitoring that and seeing.
Yeah, it gets used maybe a little bit more in the preseason, but even then we really rarely use it, because when the factors that we've spoken about, and then looking at the training week that they have, which can be 25 hours a week, something like this, such a huge amount of volume in their week, that the potential risk, especially during winter when it's colder air, which can cause dry mouth and can increase your risk of upper respiratory tract infections, that having added stress of low carb training, which increases the cortisol response to the session, which further suppresses your immune system, just opens up more risk more frequently to infection.
Interesting.
So we don't want to risk infection, and a rider then loses a week or 2 weeks of riding when we could just do it fed, or, it doesn't mean they have to do 90 grams an hour. They could do, 60.
Yep.
But it's going to be better for their recovery, and they're going to perform better.
So my journalist brain is saying the headline here is fasted training can make you sick.
Yeah, I mean, it could do, for sure.
As could any training, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess so, perhaps. but that's an interesting point. I've never heard that before, about the potential risk of infection.
Yeah. I actually think it's really interesting because, we have hung out a lot over the years, but since Emily and myself moved to the north, we were really busy with Atticus, and then COVID, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We ultimately haven't seen you in person and hung out for 4 years, which is shameful.
It is shocking.
But I actually have noticed a difference in how you approach nutrition now from before. And in that 4 years, you've basically been with, how many years have you been with EF now?
4 years.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
The thing that I've heard you talk about more in this time than you ever have before is keeping people healthy.
Yeah.
And it makes sense because these are like super elite athletes that like part of the job is making sure they're fit, making sure they're healthy, making sure they can race, making sure they're not injured.
Yep.
And you're part of that in the nutrition space is that focus.
Yeah. We've had the lowest amount of sickness in it currently. This year, we've had the lowest amount of sickness we've had in a long time. And yeah, it's crazy that, you know, sickness can ruin a whole preseason.
Yeah.
You know, you're in a build, and then you lose 2 weeks to sickness. Then you've had 2 weeks off the bike essentially with maybe some lower volume towards the end. And then that you've got to start all over again. And maybe actually you're racing, I don't know, Tour Down Under, which is already an early start to your season. Mm-hmm. Like it's suddenly all just got a little bit ruined.
I want a caveat for normal people that not riding for 2 weeks doesn't mean that you're going to be back to zero. It's that for a professional cyclist, they are building and therefore it just knocks that build phase. But for normal people, being ill and taking 2 weeks off the bike is fine. It's not going to be a big deal.
Yeah, of course.